Hey, do you need wallpaper? Go to wallpaperboulevard.com. Give them my name, tell them Spencer Colgan sent you, and they'll be sure to give you 10% off at checkout. Check it out. Tell them I said hello. They have a tremendous selection. Don't shop anywhere else until you've checked out www.wallpaperboulevard.com. This is Spencer Colgan, and welcome back to my wallpaper and painting channel on YouTube. Remove wallpaper, install wallpaper. That's the focus of this video. Behind me, you're looking at a paper wall covering on an accent wall in a bedroom. We're going to take it down as quickly as possible without injury to the wall, hopefully, and reinstall a Limitless Walls beautiful wall covering after we get it down and clean up the wall. Let's take a look at the product. Here's our Limitless Walls guarantee. Very good product, very good company, American made. And it's a lovely girls' room wall covering. This, I'm sure, I haven't been told yet, but this is going to be a double cut where we take panel number 1 and make it nice and plumb, and then hang panel number 2 right over it, and then we're going to line up this pattern and cut right through the overlap. Okay, so to remove the paper, we want to make sure we do as little or no damage to the wall as possible. So I wet the wall down with spray, just a water bottle. There's a lot of do-it-yourselfers out there. They're from all over the world, and they love to do their own wallpaper. So we just wet it, wet it, and all you're doing is compromising the adhesion of the old product to the wall and gently removing the wall covering. Now, this is not how to remove paper, pulling it away from the wall, and this is how to remove wallpaper, peeling it back. And when you do it like that, when you peel rather than pull, what you do is you decrease the pressure on the wall, the pull pressure. So you're making the product come off easier without pulling the wall with it when you peel. And when you peel, there's no pulling it toward yourself. You're just peeling it back. And you can see why this would be the best way to go. If you have trouble removing wall covering, I always tell folks, use water, 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 and when that fails, use more water, because tools and other products are only going to harm the wall and your lungs. So water is the way to go. One of the things you want to concentrate on when removing the wallpaper is each seam. When you put water on top of the seam, it eventually seeps through and then makes it where you can peel it off. If you're fortunate, as I am right now, the material will come off with ease. Now, let's just say you're a pro and you're watching this. You might say to yourself, well, I'm still new at this. I wonder what he charges. What do you charge for this? Now, if you're a pro, it's a great question. what you charge for a wallpaper removal depends on the time it takes you. Now think about that. If a wallpaper removal price depends upon the time it takes you, how could you possibly give a price before you start? Answer: you don't. If you have an established reputation in the community in which you work, which is a must, you say, Mrs. Smith, I'm not going to give you a price for that because I don't want to overcharge you. Wallpaper removal can sometimes be very time consuming, but in some cases it's not. So if I charge you according to the average, I'm going to wind up overcharging you. Why don't you let me see how long it's going to take so that I can give you a fair price? And if you have a good name, she's going to say, that sounds fair. What do you think it'll charge? What do you think it'll take? And sometimes the answer to that might be, I honestly have no idea. This wallpaper looks like it was put up long ago by someone who didn't really know how to hang wallpaper. Or you could say, I think it'll only take me a day because I pulled it off here and I went over there and pulled it off, and it's coming off fairly easily. I think it'll cost this, but here's what I'll do for you. I've been doing this a long time, and I'm not going to exceed this amount for this job. But I know that might sound a lot, but it may be nowhere near that price, okay? So if you have the trust of the customer, it means everything. And you have to be an honest business person in order to be able to say that to a customer and get them to go along with it. You have to be recommended. You have to have honest business practices in order for someone to trust you, because once they let you start working, they're obligated to pay you, right? So you give a fair estimation of time. You know, this is what I'm going to get for the day if it takes me a day. But if it only takes me a half a day, this is what I'm going to charge you. All right? So when you get your wallpaper down, that's a good area. This is wet. You want to go around, just make sure that you got all of the backing off, because you don't want the backing to stay on the wall. You want that off. And once you're sure of that, you can put your fan on the wall and let this dry so that you can get ready to hang the new product. What I do here is now I wait until this dries. Now, there are folks watching this who say, well, I didn't have any wallpaper on the wall, Spencer. I'm ready to hang right now. Well, what I'm about to say doesn't apply to you. So now, if you look on my hand, I have a substance on my hand. This is super smooth right here, but not so here, okay? And this is a paste residue that you don't want to mess with. You don't want to mess with this. Your best bet is to let it dry. You let it dry. It's easier to just lightly sand this with a pole sander than mess with it now. Because if you do this, you're going to get voids. You're going to make pocks in the surface. You see that? You leave that on until it's all dry. Because you know You know melted cheese, when you go like this, it goes, you know, it comes like stringy. But if it's not melted, you can pull it off in big pieces. When things get wet, they lose their constitutional integrity. I'm not talking about a document. I'm talking about the essence of material. It loses its constitution when it's wet, like anything else, right? It will become super soft. And so we let this dry, and then when it becomes nice and dry, we will just lightly sand it, and you won't get this anymore. You'll get nice and smooth, like where it's dry here. Okay, I have an 80 grit sanding paper that I'm going to use on my sanding pole and just take off any clinkers that are on that wall to make it super smooth. I think we're all good now. I think we're all good. We'll wait for this to dry, and then we're going to Velcro the wall. I'll show you what that means coming up. Now we're going to seal that wall with my wall sealer, my sizing agent. Remember they used to call it that? Grandmom used to call it that. Or maybe you're so young now, your great-grandmother used to call it that. And what is my sizing agent? Well, you're not going to find it at the wallpaper store because they don't sell it there. This is Weld Bond. And if you look at what Weld Bond does, is that it seals porous surfaces. Okay? And you can use 1 part Weld Bond to 3 parts water, or if you want to make it a little tighter consistency, 1 part Weld Bond, 2 parts water. What does this do? Well, you have to know your surface. What I'm hanging wallpaper over is a very porous skim coat. This is actually joint compound, plaster. And so it's very porous. And that's why I'm filling the pores with this barrier. This creates a skin between the wallpaper and the wall, so that when you remove the wallpaper in a few years, you don't tear this down with the wallpaper. So size the wall if you want to get hired back, because in 5 years, if you're still in business and the people call you back, They're gonna say, your wallpaper took my wall down. Size the walls. After that's all done, wait about a half an hour for that wetness to dry, and you'll be ready to hang. Okay, so we have our panels pasted by putting the paste on the back of the material and then letting the material sit. Now, this is a Limitless Walls product. Okay, so let's talk about the backing. To help you remember the top, I always overlap the top onto the bottom. This way, when you unravel this after you roll it, you know which is your top. Now, let's take a look at the backing. It's a paper backing glued to a very good quality vinyl. Okay. Now, this paper backing doesn't allow you to book it very long. The most you should have this product soaking is 20 minutes without having to worry about, and after 20 minutes you'll have to worry about delamination of the backing from the vinyl. Okay, so if you're not going to work quickly, just do one at a time. So it's an accent wall. So if we started hanging the wallpaper up against this trim, would we have to plumb this edge? Well, if this trim is plumb, I don't think we have to plumb the rest of it. What do you think? What do you think, Phil? Can we carry on? I think so. In my opinion, the most important thing you're going to need to know for this particular type of installation is the following. We don't have a lot of excess at the top or at the bottom. Okay? Please take my advice here. You see how little we have? That's it. Can anybody perceive a problem on the succeeding sheets? Especially if this were to end over there. Anybody? What if I took, not thinking, the top of my mural, the very top of it, above my finger, and I put it right in the corner there? Does anybody see a problem that can happen? If this is not level, eventually what you might have is a matching pattern here and here and runoff. In other words, if this were crooked, let's say this goes up here or over here, but you limited yourself by putting the edge of your wallpaper right up against the top, thinking that it were level, you might find that in order to meet this sheet here, and here you might find that you'll have a gap above the second or third or fourth sheet. In order to avoid that, use the little amount you have, at least as a measure of good prudence. You tell the customer, look, your ceiling's crooked. I used an inch here, and you still ran off more than an inch. There's nothing I can do. You should have gotten at least 4 inches extra here and at least 4 inches extra here. But what these companies make you do is to purchase a whole different size of, their next size may in fact be 2 feet more and $300 more. I don't think that's the case with the product we're hanging or this company, but it is often the case whereby if you get a larger mural than you need, you may find that you're spending the next size up, which may be more than $200. Do you understand? And so the lady who ordered this said, no, just give me the exact measurement from top to bottom. So I'm appealing to you, the wallpaper hanger at home, who hangs wallpaper on Saturdays and goes to work on Monday. Be careful of that. Don't go a little higher and trim this. You want some extra space to play with. You don't want the top of this thing going here. You wanna use some extra space, okay? Let's go over some other tips. You see this beautiful pink color? You want to keep that on the wallpaper, especially here, right? Let me just tell you, and please use my failures as your success. These colors come off. To avoid them coming off, you can do what I'm doing right now. But when it comes to wiping it down with water, be careful, especially with dark colors. The color comes off. It has happened to me several times. Just push out your air pockets. Ideally from the center out to the edge. If you want to get some cardiovascular workout, you can do it like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Take a break. Cutting around an electric socket. Well, I'm making an impression on the vinyl. You can see it in the screen. Then with 2 hands, I control the movement of my blade, and I get a visual on where the top and where the bottom is. And I use 2 hands so it doesn't fly off and cut more than I want it to. I saw Aubrey from the UK, England. He just recently had something about that. And I said, oh, I'd like to meet him. Very nice guy. Does anybody know Aubrey? The British fella who does Wallpaper in England. Nice guy. He reminds me of the Prime Minister. Both of them need a brush. You know, like a hairbrush. But otherwise, I think he's a great fellow. Actually, I should have said the former Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. But anyway, I mean, the fellow, the Prime Minister, he needs a haircut. But anyway, what do we do next? Well, the process of putting paste on the back may have gotten fingerprints with paste on it. We want to clean this off before we go any further. So with a microfiber wallpaper mop, which you can get by contacting me, and if you are within the first 100 persons who email me for one of these, I'll put my signature right here, Spencer Colgan, in permanent marker, so that when you're doing your wall covering, you can think of me and remember me. Okay? It's a microfiber cloth, and they last quite a while. Okay? So I go in both directions because this is a textured paper. We want to get any imperfections out of the grooves of this product. You know why? Because they get into the grooves. Paste and whatever. Okay? So, let's take a look. So I'm a left-handed person. I'm going to want to put my second sheet with the second sheet overlapping onto the first. If you're a right-handed person, you probably want to start down there on the right. Right-handed start on the right, lefties start on the left, usually. So that, if you're a righty, you can take the opposite path. And that is to say that this sheet, which will be your third, will be overlapped onto this so that you can work from this side. Okay? And your right hand can work on this. In this case, I will work in this way because it's easier for a left-handed person. Okay. I'll get out of your way. And I'd like to show you, I'd love to show you what's going on here. Okay, let's go up close. Now, this company is very good explaining what's going on here. But there are a lot of wallpaper companies who will just throw this in your lap, your good paper hanger or your homeowner, and you don't know what you're looking at. And you don't know there's something called a double cut, an overlap. So here's the thing. Let me get this overlap properly and then I'll show you how I did it. I can give you some really good tips here. Number one, you may lose sight of the fact that you have to be lined up here. And so this will be higher than it's supposed to be. And then you'll get it all on the wall and you'll realize, what's going on here? Well, do you see my overlap at the top? Meaning, this piece, isn't it equal to this? So if it's equal to it, it's gonna match up. Because if that were a lot higher, if this were a lot higher than this, then you know it's not gonna match up here because you're too high at the top. That's tip number one. Tip number two, when you're lining up the pattern, it gets tricky. You gotta study it. See these little dots here? Become familiar with them because they're underneath it too. See this dot here? Look for the one underneath it. You have to be directly over that one, so that when you cut this, and you will be cutting it, you're right over it, and you don't have like a double. See how this line goes from this sheet into that one? See that? You see this light mark right here? Look for it underneath. And if you're off, take the time to reposition it. See this dot? Same thing as underneath it. Now I'm gonna put the camera off and perfect this. And how I'm gonna move it is I'm gonna hit it like this with my damp palm. It's gonna slide it over, because you may need it over 1/8 of an inch or a 1/16. Believe it or not, it's worth it. You see this black dot right here, right in the middle of your screen? Watch this. You see when you can lift it up quickly and you see the same thing underneath it? It means you're directly over it. Watch this. If you were like this, look how the pattern changes. I'm not even on it, you can see that. But when you go like that and you see quickly, your brain captures this image and that image quickly. And if it's not moving as you do this, your brain is telling you that you're overlapped properly. Look at how perfectly this is overlapped. Watch this. See how it stays there? Little trick, okay? When you're overlapped, don't burnish your seam. Don't drag this thing repeatedly and heat it up. Go slowly and easily. That's not gonna burnish it. Nice, I'm not even putting pressure, look. But don't drag it like this. You'll make a mark and you'll see it when that sun goes down. You wanna go lightly. All you wanna do is use your hand, press it in place, because you can take the color off of it. Watch this. Watch this. Can anybody see the color off of that? Watch. I've taken the color off of it. Look. Look. The color's gone. Look at that. Don't let that be you over here. Same issue here. We are going to make sure that we're lined up properly. If you move up this side a little bit, make sure you move up the other side too, or else this is what you'll have. Okay. Let's look up there. I took a 2-week vacation recently. I feel like $1 million. $1 million bucks. It was well worth it. Well worth it. I did stop in Atlanta, and I have to admit that I was almost a victim of some criminal activity. I stopped to get gas. And I walked into a dispute in a gas station. And the guy greeted me, the fellow who wasn't so nice, he greeted me with a nickname that I can't repeat on my channel. I was going to say, do I know you? But then he might have thought that his nickname for me were appropriate. In other words, how do you know me? I said, I gotta get out of here, man. So I did. I left. We're almost done. Let's talk about the cut. Make an impression with your tool in that corner. I'm going to put my tool in there and cut on the outside facing the camera. I'll show you what I mean. See what I mean here? Okay, and we'll do that all the way over. Okay, and we're going to do it for the sides too, but let me show you something first to do in the corner. Vinyl gets stubborn in corners. You really can never get the corner of the vinyl in the corner. So here's what I want you to do. Get rid of this excess. It's going to obstruct a fine cut. Now that you have the vinyl in the corner, you can cut it more easily, as you can see. Having that corner obstructed by this stubborn material can mess your cut up. So that when you slice it, as I showed you, you get a nice clean cut there. Now that our mural is all trimmed at the top and on the sides, what we'll now do is cut or double cut our two seams. That is the first and the second sheet and the second and the third sheet. Remember, we overlap them. It's just the way it's done in the wallpaper business. There are many ways to do a double cut. What you have to do in a double cut is to penetrate both the top layer and the bottom layer simultaneously without striking the wall. Now, if you're experienced at this, you know the pressure you'll need. If you're not experienced this, you'll do one of the two things that follow. One, you won't press hard enough and you'll make the seam a disaster. In fact, it would be better that you pressed harder than softer. Secondly, you'll overdo it and cut through the wall. Now, if I were to choose one of those errors, I would choose the second, because at least your mural is going to look good. You could always seal the slice that you put in the wall underneath your wallpaper. Here's what happens if you slice the wall. You create a little air pocket underneath the seam. After I cut through this, if I penetrate the wall, I'm going to create a situation whereby eventually the seam will have a tunnel underneath it. And that tunnel was created by my knife. That's why it's best to use a single edge blade. The thinner your slice, the better. If I create an air pocket, eventually the seam that rests on the lacerated wall will eventually give way to receiving moisture in the humidity of the air, and it will eventually, and I mean eventually, down the road, perhaps maybe 6 months to a year, your seam will start to lift. And that is because you penetrated the wall, voiding the substrate underneath the seam, although imperceptible to the human eye. When I do my double cut, underneath it, if I penetrate that wall, along this edge is going to be a slice in the wall. Eventually, air gets in there and moisture, and then it dries. And what did we see at the beginning of the video? What does moisture do to wallpaper? It takes it down. And so your seams will lift. During the double cut process, generally speaking, I want to keep a plumb cut. Now it happens to be that I'm overlapped 2 inches. There's a lot of room for error. But when you're doing a cut, especially with dark colors, if you do this, you're gonna see it. This is more forgiving, but if you want to be a pro, cut it straight. There's a couple of ways to do it. One, take a level and draw a pencil mark. Draw a pencil mark against the left edge of this level, this side of it. And then when you have your level mark, put this straight edge just to the right of it, so that when you cut up near your pencil mark, you cut the pencil mark off and you have a straight level line. But now, if you really think about it, you already have a straight edge, don't you? Can we cut a straight line, plumb, straight up and down, if we simply keep our blade parallel to that edge? I think you can do it. If you don't think you can, don't try it. Rent a laser level, unless you have one, or draw the pencil mark. If you live in the UK, get a plumb bob and wait till that thing stops moving on the bottom. I don't know how they do that. Who has the time to wait for that thing? Anyway, to each his own. I'm going to go with knowing that the color is forgiving, knowing that I am going to keep a parallel cut line up against my factory straight edge. I'm going to keep this parallel as I go down, and that will make my cut straight. I have a laser level, but I'm in between a kid's dresser and the wall, and I'm starting to feel claustrophobic. And I'm getting aggravated. Doctor says, you like living? You gotta reduce your stress. I said, how do I do that? He says, well, what's the most stressful thing in your life? I said, hanging wallpaper. He goes, you gotta stop it. I told him to get lost. Now I'm gonna go within 1/4 of an inch of my edge. change the blade, snap it off, resume. Now, let me move you down there. Let me share something with you that's very important. So I was cutting a high-end vinyl in a high-end place. I'm sorry, strike that. It was a high-end leather. And here's what happened. I came down to this, look. See this trim here? I said, oh man, it's very hard to keep cutting like this. Oh, blade lifted off. My sweat started pouring down like a river. Now you can put a straight edge up against where you left off when you're cutting that high-end leather. But boy, if you're off, and it was gray, dark gray, I could choose a point on the bottom and then bring it up to my cut point. But it didn't match. It didn't match. It was slightly off, and the guy's head, when you take a bath, it was right near the cut. So here's what I suggest if that happens to you. Decline the job if there's trim in the way, because sometimes you just can't do it. Or in that case, what you could do is, I thought about starting at the bottom and then going up, but it's very difficult to start the blade like this and go up, but that was an option. The other thing I decided, it was a non-pattern. You take the piece off because you messed up and you move it over. You overlap it and you do the cut again. But in a pattern case, you can't do that. Keep that in mind. I lift my blade 45 degrees, see what I'm doing here? So that it won't slip. Because when you get to the end, the blade doesn't want to do its job, neither does your hand. Okay? Let's see how I did. I'm going to be honest with you. If you see me struggling to rip the overlap, underlap, see, here's our underlap, right? Let me show you what I mean here. So here's my underlap. I'm pulling it off now, look. See that piece? That was the piece we cut through. Remember, I had to cut through too. But if you see any resistance, I mean, I didn't cut through it well enough. It's always a nail biter, okay? Cutting enough and not cutting too hard. Okay, fortunately for me, it all came off. Okay, so in this section, I'm just going over the seam, but I'd like to emphasize once again, don't be too rough over vinyl seams. You can wind up burnishing them. Just nice and easy, okay? I know you can do it. Okay. Now, to perfect the seam, we have to understand what's going on under the seam. I want you to think about two blankets on a bed, one next to the other. not overlapping. On a bed. You just got out of the bed. And you have two levels of blanket. One a little ruffled, one a not so ruffled. What you have to do with this vinyl is to make the seam flush with each other. If you don't do it now, the seam will never look right. So that's what you have to understand, that the seam just underwent an incision. Your hand, your guide, it all put pressure at the seam, and it made it the ruffled blanket scenario. And what your roller is going to do, take note, I'm not using a hard steel roller. I'm using a softer product that's wood and has a little give in it. Well, it's going to make these two pieces flush, so that when I do this, and I'm pushing this way, when I do this, it looks like a piece of flesh that was mended back together. If you have a stubborn area, drag your smoother at a 5-degree angle against the seam. Note that it's not like this, because if it is, you're going to dent it. 5 degrees or less. Put lots of pressure on it, and your seam will disappear. Okay. Now, to perfect the seam, we have to understand what's going on under the seam. I want you to think about two blankets on a bed, one next to the other, not overlapping. On a bed. You just got out of the bed. And you have two levels of blanket. One a little ruffled, one a not so ruffled. What you have to do with this vinyl is to make the seam flush with each other. If you don't do it now, the seam will never look right. So that's what you have to understand, that the seam just underwent an incision. Your hand, your guide, it all put pressure at the seam, and it made it the ruffled blanket scenario. And what your roller is going to do, take note, I'm not using a hard steel roller. I'm using a softer product that's wood and has a little give in it. Well, it's going to make these two pieces flush, so that when I do this, and I'm pushing this way, when I do this, it looks like a piece of flesh that was mended back together. If you have a stubborn area, drag your smoother at a 5-degree angle against the seam. Note that it's not like this, because if it is, you're going to dent it. 5 degrees or less. Put lots of pressure on it, and your seam will disappear. After your seam is set, I like to go over it just one last time and wipe it down just gently. And this broad coverage here also serves to set not only the seam, but the adjoining area into its permanent location. In other words, a little pressure on both sides of the seam makes sure that this doesn't slide away. That's the way I like to think of it. And that is our mural installation. Now, if you're a hanger, you know this. But if you're not, and you're new to hanging wallpaper, please don't panic if you get a bubble. You'll see them as the vinyl constricts against the wall, at the same time releasing the air in the moisture of the paste. Remember, we essentially have a damp wall underneath, right? And so this has to dry. And where is the gas going when it's released? It's going right under, out from the wall, and right under the wall covering. The vinyl itself is releasing air because, remember, we pasted the backing. That moisture has to dry. And so it's releasing itself from the paper toward the wall. The wall is giving up its moisture. And then eventually what happens is it evaporates and it seeps backwards into the wall and dries. That's why if you put wall covering on a steel surface, fiberglass, something that doesn't absorb cement, you have to be careful about bubbles. You can't leave the job until you get rid of all of them. So keep that in mind if you're hanging on a surface whose substrate is not permeable, because you have to dissipate the air pockets out through the edges because it won't seep into the wall. Okay, so I stay a few minutes afterwards and get some of these obvious air pockets out. But if you have little ones the size of your thumbnail, they are paste bubbles and they dissipate all by themselves. So what do you think? I know, I'll get a comment. Do you see the bubble? Bubble, 14.7 seconds. YouTube has all kinds. Okay? Okay, but for the most part, we got the seams trimmed. We learned about planning it out, right? I'll play with this, but this is the installation. Tell me what you think. If you're a newbie, did you learn something? Let me know in the comments section, okay? Take a moment just to write something. You could say it stunk. Your videos stink. Say something. Okay, thanks for watching. Try to find that seam. Now, if you've watched it this far, can you just, I love when you guys do this for me. Can you just write at the bottom, perfect, but not with an ER, P-U-R-F-E-C-T. This way I know you watched it. Thank you. Just so you know, when I went off camera, I really did come over here and push the bubbles out. See ya.